Well, we are joined now by the co-leader of the Greens, Adrian Ramsay. Good morning to you. Thank you for coming and speaking to us. We heard Nick there saying big plans, big costs. The two main parties are falling over themselves to say they're not going to raise taxes. The Greens taking a completely different tack.
Well, we are indeed, and we're doing that because we have an NHS which is severely overstretched, people struggling to get access to a doctor or a dentist. We've got a housing crisis where there's 1 million people on the council house waiting list. We've got sewage in our rivers. We've got bills escalating in energy and food. And all of these things need investment if we're to tackle the cost of living crisis, if we're to create the jobs that we can create by insulating people's homes, investing in renewable energy, and if we're to put the investment in that's needed to both defend and restore our NHS and social care. And we are setting out a vision for how that can be done, because sadly there's a conspiracy of silence in this election between Labour and the Conservatives about the fact that, as the Institute for Fiscal Studies has said, the next government is either going to have to cut public services or increase taxes. And the Green Party is setting out a vision for how we could ask those with the broadest shoulders to pay modestly more in tax in a way that will enable us all to benefit. So too many people are having to fork out for a private dentist if they can afford to do so, or having to pay exorbitant fees for their train fare, or having skyrocketing energy and food bills. We want a set of solutions that will bring down the costs of those things for everybody's benefit, and we think it's reasonable to ask those with the broadest shoulders to pay a bit more to do so for a fairer and greener future.
You mentioned the Institute for Fiscal Studies there, the IFS, and they've looked through your plans independently, and they're saying that even what you're talking about raising, like the carbon taxes, they're doubtful that it would raise enough money. So they're questioning whether your sums add up.
Well, when the BBC analysed our manifesto when we announced it last week, you quoted a University of Warwick professor who said that our plans are economically credible, and that's because they've been developed in consultation with a range of experts in different sectors, for example, researchers and organisations working on the idea of a wealth tax.
But the IFS not convinced?
Well, they have actually applauded some of our proposals, for example, in relation to closing loopholes on inheritance tax, which is one of the things that we think needs to be done to make our tax system fairer. But we do need to look at ways in which we can put the investment in to tackle the fact that our NHS is severely overstretched. I've spent more time than I was expecting to in the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital in recent months, supporting a close family member who's been in the health system and is now in the care system. And it's just severely overstretched. There are patients in corridors, staff who do an incredible job, but they just don't have the time to look after the individual patients, make sure they're getting the care and support they need. And the same with our care system as well. And there's no way around it but needing to put the investment in. And what we're proposing in terms of the proportion of GDP that would go into being raised from taxes, the UK is near the bottom of the European league table in that at the moment. Our proposals are mainstream by European standards, but we've seen both the Conservatives and Labour roll back so far in terms of the money they're willing to raise to put into our public services that you know, they're actually on the extreme here. So we're proposing a set of proposals that will create a better future, real hope and real change. And that's why we need a group of Green MPs in the next Parliament. I'm not going to sit here and say to you that we're expecting to form the next government, but we are confident of having a group of Green MPs in that next Parliament, because with Labour expected to come in but proposing timid changes and backsliding all the time on climate and on funding for public services, if we have a group of Green MPs there, if we have a greater diversity of voices in Parliament, we can push them to take the real action that's needed, scrutinise their proposals, keep them honest and offer real hope and real change on these big issues of our time.
And just briefly take us through, you've mentioned wealth taxes a number of times. In reality, what is that going to mean?
The specific proposal we've set out in consultation with experts is that those with over 10 million in wealth and assets will be asked to pay 1% on wealth and assets over that 10 million level and 2% over 1 billion. So we're talking about the multimillionaires and the billionaires. We've costed what that would bring in 15 billion a year by the end of the next Parliament, as I say, in consultation with experts, and emulating what other countries like Spain and Switzerland have done in taking this approach. And the reality is, if we're going to have Scandinavian and European levels of our health services and public services, we're not going to get that with a US level of tax system. And the Green Party is the only party that's being honest in this election, that if we want to bring about that change, if we want to restore our NHS, if we want to invest in the transition to a green economy which can bring our bills down, support our farmers to produce more food locally, if we want to support our schools which are crumbling and haven't had the investment that's needed to support all pupils, including those with special educational needs, all of those things need investment, and we're setting out how that can be done with the right ambition.
You're saying that you're realistic about the number of MPs that you might get in Parliament, and obviously there's only one day that matters, one poll that matters, and that's the 4th of July. But if the opinion polls are vaguely right at the moment, we're potentially looking at a Labour Party in government with potentially a big majority. I just wonder, if we're looking at a majority for a Labour government of the kind of size the polls are suggesting, how much sway really would a handful of Green MPs have in the House of Commons?
Well, John, you're absolutely right. We are on track to a Labour government with a big majority, and that's why I would directly encourage people to vote with your hearts in this election, because it's an opportunity to really say the sort of future we want, that we want real hope and real change. People are saying to me on the doorstep that
in the House of Commons, if you had, say, 1 or 2 Green MPs there among the 650, really, how much difference are they going to make? How would they sway any government with a big majority?
I think that the new government and Keir Starmer would quite like it if they didn't have a range of voices in Parliament that were scrutinising what they're doing. But it makes for a better government and a better democracy if there's a greater range of voices there. And, you know, people are saying to me on the doorstep all the time in East Anglia, where I'm from, that they're thinking about what the future's going to be like for their children and grandchildren, in terms of the environment, in terms of our public services, in terms of our education system. And if we have Green voices in Parliament, we can hold that new government honest. We can scrutinise what they're doing, press them to tackle these defining issues of our time. And that's why we have such a great opportunity at this election. And you mentioned the polls, but actually there's 650 different elections happening here in different constituencies, and there are so many places on the ground, places like Brighton Pavilion, Bristol Central, Waveney Valley, North Herefordshire and others, where Greens have a really strong track record on the ground and have got a fantastic chance of electing Green MPs to hold that government to account, push them in the right direction and represent local residents when it comes to the 4th of July.
Let's talk about some of the specific proposals you're putting forward. We're just one of the news stories this morning is the fact that Vladimir Putin is visiting North Korea. Kim Jong-un. There is a feeling at the moment in the world that things are very uncertain.
Yes.
The Greens want to get rid of the nuclear deterrent policy. Is now the time to be doing this? Is now this time to be having this in your manifesto?
Well, people are rightly worried about the international conflicts in the world, and we need to have an approach that's based on trying to de-escalate those, support countries like Ukraine that are facing horrific invasions, support the people of Gaza who are in a horrific situation with aid being blocked. And we've been clear, we want a bilateral ceasefire, we want the hostages released, and that international pressure needs to be brought to bear. But if you look at your question specifically on Trident and on nuclear weapons, there are retired army generals, there are former defence secretaries like Michael Portillo who've said that Trident is not the answer to the security threats that we face today. And I think that the defence spending is far better put into our army personnel who do a great job both in defending our country and in humanitarian work around the world.
Just before you go, we've had a few messages from viewers asking why do you have 2 leaders, co-leaders in the Green Party? Does that not dilute your messaging?
Look, I think we live in a modern world of work where outside of politics, it's more common in the workplace now to have job shares, to have flexible working, to have more collaborative ways of working. And having 2 co-leaders means you have 2 sets of skills, you have two brains, you have a collaborative approach. We're based in different sides of the country. I'm in East Anglia, Carla is in Bristol.
What if you have 2 different opinions on something?
But, I mean, well, first of all, we share the same set of green values, so we usually agree. But actually, it's common in politics and in life to have disagreements, and you need to have collaborative ways to work with other people to find ways forward. And I signed the Joe Cox Foundation pledge for more in common, for more civility in our politics. And I think in politics in general, we need to be looking for ways in which we can agree with others more, in which we can be collaborative. And if I'm elected as an MP, I'm not going to be tribal. I'm going to take a constructive approach in working with the other parties and pressing them to take the action that's needed on the sorts of issues we've talked about today.
Adrian, it's really good for you to come in. Thank you so much. I know that you've got to go because you're joining Nikki Campbell, I think, on 5 Live. I need to answer your questions. That's from 9 o'clock, so you can listen to BBC Sounds or watch on BBC News or the iPlayer.
And you